For part four of Night, we are covering the last three chapters of the novel, and those chapters are very, very short. Chapter 7 covers the train ride between the camp of Gleiwitz and the camp of Buchenwald in Germany. Chapter 8 covers his father's illness, and Chapter 9 covers the end of January through April of 45. Starting on in Chapter 7, we are going to look at a very specific moment that helped to shape how Ellie saw the rest of the world. It's amazing how when people are treated like something, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. For example, if you're told you're good at art, you're good at art, you're good at art, you're going to build a confidence and you're going to believe that you are an artist. In a similar but horrifying fashion, if you are told you are an animal, you are an animal, you are an animal, at some point, you're going to start buying into it. At some point, you're going to do anything to survive. In Chapter 7, in the train car, there followed days and nights of traveling. Usually, we would pass through German towns, usually very early in the morning. German laborers were going to work. They would stop and look at us without surprise. One day, when we had come to a stop, a worker took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into a wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought desperately over a few crumbs. The worker watched the spectacle with great interest. And then he's going to take you out of that story and tell you about something in the future before dropping you back in. Years later, I witnessed a similar spectacle in Aden. Our ship's passengers amused themselves by throwing coins to the natives who dove to retrieve them. An elegant Parisian lady took great pleasure in this game. When I noticed two children desperately fighting in the water, one trying to strangle the other, I implored the lady, "Please don't throw any more coins." "Why not?" she said. "I like to give charity." And now you're thrown back into the train car. In the wagon where the bread had landed, a battle had ensued. Men were hurling themselves against each other, trampling, tearing at, and mauling each other. Beasts of prey unleashed animal hate in their eyes. An extraordinary vitality possessed them, sharpening their teeth and nails. A crowd of workmen and curious passers-by had formed all along the train. They had undoubtedly never seen a train with this kind of cargo. Soon pieces of bread were falling into the wagons from all sides, and the spectators observed these emaciated creatures ready to kill for a crust of bread. A piece fell into our wagon. I decided not to move. Anyway, I knew that I would not be strong enough to fight off dozens of violent men. I saw, not far from me, an old man dragging himself on all fours. He had just detached himself from the struggling mob. He was holding one hand to his heart. At first I thought he had received a blow to his chest. Then I understood. He was hiding a piece of bread under his shirt. With lightning speed, he pulled it out and put it to his mouth. His eyes lit up. A smile like a grimace illuminated his ashen face and was immediately extinguished. A shadow had lain down beside him, and the shadow threw itself over him. Stunned by the blows, the old man was crying, "Meyer, my little Meyer, don't you recognize me? You're killing your father. I have bread for you too, for you too." He collapsed, but his fist was still clutching a small crust. He wanted to raise it to his mouth, but the other threw himself on him. The old man mumbled something, groaned, and died. Nobody cared. His son searched him, took the crust of bread, and began to devour it. He didn't get far. Two men had been watching him. They jumped him. Others joined in. When they withdrew, there were two dead bodies next to me, the father and the son. I was 16. I usually ask why in the world you think that Vizel would drop his age at this rather poignant moment. It seems kind of a random detail to post after he was like, "And we were in the train, and this horrible thing happened, and I was this old." But he went into the camp when he was 15 years old. He did not mention his birthday at any point because that did not matter really at all to him. It wasn't significant. But all of a sudden he says, "I was 16," after seeing this horrible incident where a child was willing to kill his own father for a crust of bread. And that's what he was looking at. When you're 16, what are you worried about? Having a job? doing school, what you're gonna do afterwards, having some kind of significant other. He was in a train watching men battle each other to the death for a crust of bread, and he watched a child kill his father for bread at the age of 16. At the end of chapter 7, at the very end of chapter 7, you have been told that the train will stop every so often to unload its dead, and they're just throwing the bodies out along the train tracks, not to clean them up. They're trying to go as fast as they can, again, to get away from the Russians. Um, at the very beginning, you saw that there were 100 people loaded onto the train car. Uh, Something I did not read to you was that his father was so still and cold that at one point people tried to grab his father and throw him overboard, but Eli said no. So now instead of father taking care of son, now son is beginning to take care of father, and Eli prevented them from throwing his father over the edge of the train car. At the end, when they finally arrived in Buchenwald, he says we had been 100 or so in this wagon. 12 of us left it, among them my father and myself. We had arrived in Buchenwald, and this is the final destination. This is the last stop. Had Ely not been there, his father would not have made it to this point. When they get into the camp of Buchenwald, chaos ensues. They were going to take the prisoners into a shower area, an actual shower area, but an air raid happened because in January of 45, chaos was occurring for the German army. You had the Russians pushing in on them from the east, and you had the Allies pushing in on them from the west, and they were being trapped inside of the country, and there were constant air raids because the Allies and the Russians um, were making the war just about impossible, and they were about to finish things off. They only had a couple months to go. Ely ended up getting separated from his father because his father was so tired and he was struggling so very much. And he got separated from him the next morning. Ely woke up and he says, I remember that I had a father. He ran and found him, but his father was beginning to succumb to a terrible sickness. And both his body was giving out as well as his mind. When we finally get to page 110, it was discovered that his father had been suffering from dysentery, which would result in bloody diarrhea until you die. It's caused from a number of different things, but contaminants in the water is primary. On 110, with his father not being able to get up, not being able to move, doctors not being able to do anything for him, Ely admits that he started giving him food against his own will because he knows that he can eat that and he's going to have a better chance of surviving. But he still feels very loyal to his father and wants to take care of him. A week went by like that. Is this your father? Asked the Block Hill test. Yes, he is very sick. The doctor won't do anything for him. He looked me straight in the eye. The doctor cannot do anything more for him, and neither can you. He placed his big hairy hand on my shoulder and added, Listen to me, kid. Don't forget that you were in a concentration camp. In this place, it is every man for himself, and you cannot think of others. Not even your father. In this place, there is no such thing as father, brother, friend. Each of us lives and dies alone. Let me give you good advice. Stop giving your ration of bread and soup to your old father. You cannot help him anymore, and you are hurting yourself. In fact, you should be getting his rations. I listened to him without interrupting. He was right, I thought deep down, not daring to admit it to myself. Too late to save your old father. You could have 2 rations of bread, 2 rations of soup. It was only a fraction of a second, but it left me feeling guilty. I ran to get some soup and brought it to my father, but he did not want it. All he wanted was water. Don't drink water, eat the soup. I'm burning up. Why are you so mean to me, my son? Water. I brought him water. Then I left the block for roll call, but I quickly turned back. I lay down on the upper bunk. The sick were allowed to stay in the block. So I would be sick? I didn't want to leave my father. All around me, there was silence now, broken only by moaning. In front of the block, the SS were giving orders. An officer passed between the bunks. My father was pleading. My son, water, I'm burning up my insides. Silence over there, barked the officer. Eleazar, continued my father. Water! The officer came closer and shouted to him to be silent, but my father did not hear. He continued to call me. The officer wielded his club and dealt him a violent blow to the head. I didn't move. I was afraid. My body was afraid of another blow, this time to my head. My father groaned once more. I heard, Eleazar. I could see that he was still breathing in gasps. I didn't move. When I came down from my bunk after roll call, I could see his lips trembling. He was murmuring something. I remained more than an hour leaning over him, looking at him, etching his bloody, broken face into my mind. Then I had to go to sleep. I climbed into my bunk above my father, who was still alive. The date was January 28th, 1945. I woke up at dawn on January 29th. On my father's cot there lay another sick person. They must have taken him away before daybreak and taken him to the crematorium. Perhaps he was still breathing? No prayers were said over his tomb, no candle lit in his memory. His last word had been my name. He had called out to me, and I had not answered. I did not weep, and it pained me that I could not weep, but I was out of tears, and deep inside me, if I could have searched the recesses of my feeble conscience, I might have found something like free at last. And I think in this moment, now that we have seen a role reversal between father and son, father spent a great deal of this novel keeping son alive and motivated. And at the end, when father fell ill, son was willing to do anything to keep him safe and to stay by him. So when, at the very end, Ellie says, free at last, I think it applies to both of them. I think that his father is free because he no longer hurts and he's no longer sick and he's no longer being beaten. And I think that Ellie is now free to make sure that he takes care of himself and he stays alive. And no, I don't think that that's a selfish thing to think at this point. The end of this novel is very, very brief, and it's very brief because he says after his father's death, nothing mattered to him a whole lot anymore. And it was just a matter of eating and staying safe. So he doesn't say anything else between January 29th and April 11th. And he says that things started to get a little bit crazy the week before April 11th because the Allied forces were pushing in. And so it took until April 11th when the first American tank stood at the gates of Buchenwald. This is the end of the novel. Our first act as free men was to throw ourselves onto the provisions. That's all we thought about. No thought of revenge or of parents, only of bread. And even when we were no longer hungry, not one of us thought of revenge. The next day, a few of the young men ran into Weimar to bring back some potatoes and clothes and to sleep with girls. But still, no trace of revenge. 3 days, oh, the irony. 3 days after the liberation of Buchenwald, I became very ill, some form of poisoning, like food poisoning. I was transferred to a hospital and spent 2 weeks between life and death. One day, when I was able to get up, I decided to look at myself in the mirror on the opposite wall. I had not seen myself since the ghetto, an entire year. From the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. The look in his eyes as he gazed at me has never left me. It may not be the most exciting ending that you've ever seen, but it does very appropriately wrap up what happened to this 15, now 16-year-old in the year that he spent inside of these camps. Did he physically die inside of the camps? No. His mother and father and younger sister and his grandparents, who aren't even in the novel, they physically die. But the child that he was, who walked into this camp, did not walk out. Somebody new did, somebody grown. If we had read All Quiet on the Western Front, we would have talked about a loss of innocence. And this child had to grow up very quickly because of what happened to him. And this is the novel, Night.